Alright guys, so in this video we're going to be talking about measurements, particularly when you don't have a ruler or a traditional way of kind of taking the measurements. So we're going to actually start off with kind of talking about the bullet point addition. So there are a lot of different ways that you can get good measurements. Traditional tools like rulers, tape measures, speed squares, calipers, a whole slew of tools that you can kind of maybe find if your parents have a workshop or if your parents work in kind of a trade industry. Another option is to kind of look at added feature type tools. So some notebooks, some folders, some worksheets may have rulers kind of printed onto the object, and while you would not consider a folder to be a traditional ruler, it is a way to get fairly accurate measurements, at least for some things. Third kind of category that we're going to talk about is paper solutions, so being able to print out a ruler in case you maybe don't have one of those other options. It's a temporary solution, but one that works. But of course we can also use paper in terms of existing lines, so whether it's a regular notebook or if it's graph paper, we're going to talk about a few ways that you can kind of look at that. Now we will talk a little bit about kind of using what you know, being able to find everyday objects and be able to help you take some of those measurements or perhaps make your own version of a ruler. Then we'll talk about some of the newer ways that you can use it, take advantage of a smartphone to be able to help you with taking your measurements. Now, as we go through all of this, okay, when you're taking measurements, one of the important things is kind of checking for accuracy. So using some of those things that you know to be able to make sure that the way that you're taking those measurements is going to be accurate, close to what an inch or a centimeter might actually be. You can also take a look at how you use the tools. When you're working day to day, you want to be consistent in how you use the tool, whichever one of the many we've listed is, to be able to kind of work with it well. And with that, consider the units. Is it better for inches or metric or one of the many other units out there? Or consider kind of the scale. You're not going to want to try and measure a large desk with just a 6-inch ruler. You're going to want something that's a little bit better suited for the larger scale, just like you probably don't want to pull out a meter stick to be able to measure the size of a regular standard flash drive. So think about the size, the shape, the practicality of the different measurements. So traditional tools. These exist in many ways. We have small 6-inch metal rulers. You could be talking about a regular tape measure, being able to extend it out. These all come in different sizes and at different costs, but the kind of the general idea is there. There are a lot of ways that you can kind of get these, but maybe ask around. If you don't have a tape measure, if you don't have a speed square, maybe talk to grandparents. Maybe they have what are called kind of a folding ruler. Again, asking around is probably the best way to find some of these tools. And if you don't have them, again, inexpensive. Most stores have some type of ruler for just $1 or $2. Of course, you're going to pay more for the better, higher quality and the more precise, the more accurate rulers that go down to smaller increments. So kind of the only other one that we don't necessarily have shown on screen, but that we're going to be using a little bit. So digital caliper. You guys may remember dial calipers from some of the other classes that I've taught, but digital calipers are relatively inexpensive. You can get them for about $15 or $20 from a few places that we carry these things, Harbor Freight, Amazon, some of the other hardware stores. But the digital calipers definitely keep up with some of the accuracy and precision that we want. But again, there's kind of a special need for them. They're not going to measure everything, and none of these are going to measure everything possible. But traditional tools is probably one of the best ways to start looking at the options. Now, as I mentioned, looking around your homes, what you have, standard notebook, has or may have a ruler. Now, obviously not all will have that type of measurement option, but it's one that's worth kind of looking around and seeing if they have. Now, the other one that is relatively common to find, at least I think, is look at some folders. You know, on the inside, you can actually see kind of the regular images that they will print off not just unit conversions, but measurement tools kind of within the folders. But again, not everyone does that. You know, it adds value, but it's not going to be essential to the need. This is where we start thinking about, well, the notebook doesn't necessarily have measurements, but there are ways that we can get those measurements. Now, as I mentioned, one way to go ahead and find a ruler is to actually print one off. Okay. So we can actually see that we can print one off, and as long as it's a well formatted file, we can see that the measurements are going to be fairly accurate. So a 1-inch measure on the metal ruler is the same thing as a 1-inch distance on the printed paper. So the formatting on this one, pretty good, but again, always kind of check the accuracy when you try a new tool. The other option is to go ahead and kind of use the standard lines within kind of your objects. Okay. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and start by looking at a composition notebook. This is a little pocket-sized one, but one of the important things about many notebooks is they will, somewhere on the covers, tell you the size that it is. So in this case, we know that this is 4.5 inches. We can guess that that's height by 3.25 inches, so 3.25 wide. And in this case, let's see, trying to get to a blank page, and I've got one right on the front. What you can do is we can actually count out the lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We're going to guess that there's going to be 14 and 15. Again, we're taking some guesses here. But in taking that 4.5 inches and dividing that by the 15 lines that we see, we're going to see that this is approximately 0.3 inches. And what we can do is we can use a caliper to roughly kind of size it out. Again, this is not going to be the most practical, but we can see that 0.29 is pretty close to that rough estimation that we made. And again, better tools would make it a little easier to take accurate measurements, but it's a way to kind of investigate and see what you have. Now, the same concept typically applies for graph paper. So in this case, this is a special type of graph paper that I like, but it actually tells you on the back that its grids are 1/8 of an inch. And if we open it up, we can actually see, again, it's being honest in the reporting. You know, we can take a, let's see, take a ruler that we know, check the measurements, and we can actually find that those smaller grids, the harder ones to see ones, are that 1/8 of an inch. Now, ones that you might need to be, again, cautious of is look at them closely. Okay, so in this type of graph paper, okay, they actually tell us on the back that it's 5 by 5. You're probably wondering, what's that 5 by 5? There's no decimal in here. And if you remember in other units that we've talked about, the metric system generally does not actually show decimal values. Okay? So in this case, we can actually look at this and we can see that this is actually a 0.5 millimeter grid, or sorry, 5 millimeter grid, not 0.5. So pay attention to how it's labeled, but reading the material itself gives you an idea of kind of the size that it is. Okay. Now, one thing with paper is, again, it's a semi-standard. There are a lot of common practices, but you do need to be paying attention to the accuracy of them. The next option to kind of look at is, again, the things around you in the day-to-day world. Okay. So a lot of the things that we see built around us, made for us, follow some type of standards. So whether it's your USB charging cable for your phone, a lot of times those are advertised as being 3 foot long, 6 foot long, 8 foot, or 10 foot long. Is it a perfect measurement? No. Is it a tool you would typically use for taking measurements? Again, probably not. But knowing that allows you to go ahead and apply it to other concepts. Fold a piece of printer paper right, and we know that we could make roughly sized segments. The tile floors in many buildings are typically 1 foot, 12 inches in both directions. But we also have things like pocket change, so quarters, pennies. We also have batteries, okay, that are built to some standard, okay, and even something like Post-it notes. Okay? A lot of times we see Post-it notes, and those are supposed to be 3 inches by 3 inches. We take a ruler. Again, we can verify these as needed. We see 3 inches. But the reason that I bring out the sticky notes is because pennies measure 0.75 inches. Okay? So again, can pull out the calipers and show that that's about that 0.75. I may not have these perfectly calibrated. Quarters are a little closer to 1 inch. Again, not perfect, but relatively close. A battery, at least a 9 volt, is actually exactly 1 inch wide and can be approximately, maybe not perfectly, but again, getting some rough measurements can give us a good starting point. So in this case, what we can do in terms of actually making a ruler, okay, is we can take the sticky note, use the 9 volt battery as a straight edge to go ahead and create that 3 inch spacing. Again, it's not going to be perfect. You notice that even though we took that 1 inch measurement, there's a little bit of variation. But combined with the penny, knowing that that's going to be 0.75 inches, we can start subdividing the measurements. Okay? So in this case, we have enough information here that we have roughly 1/4 inch values. We could again take some guesses about saying that that's 1/2 inch. Okay? And we now have devised a ruler that is roughly accurate to the 1/4 inch measurements that we were looking at before. Okay? So again, this is not a perfect solution, but we can see that it's fairly close to those measurements. And sometimes when you're out in the real world, you know, you're working in the field and you don't have the right tool for the job, but you want to get a rough guess, a little bit of kind of that MacGyver technique, a little ingenuity on the field can help you go ahead and create those problems, or create the solutions to those problems. So when you're making a ruler, again, have a straight edge. In this case, we were using the 9 volt battery and the sticky notepad as kind of our straight edge for reference. We defined the unit using other things we had around us, in this case 9 volt battery and a penny. Penny was to subdivide the unit. We started the unit with the 1 inch for the 9 volt battery. We were able to go ahead and kind of expand the process. Now, the last kind of option, or at least getting a little bit more in terms of the creative side, is use the digital tools around you. Many forms, so both iOS and Android, you can find apps that basically turn the screen of your phone into a form of into the form of ruler, and sometimes it's going to be pretty accurate. So in this case, on my iPhone XR, it was able to be a fairly accurate measurement. The problem though, and I'm going to go ahead and grab a couple of those other tools, it's not necessarily the perfect measurement. Okay? So in this case, this tablet is trying to show the same screen, and its version of 4 inches is definitely nowhere close to a 4-inch ruler. Okay? So you need to be mindful of kind of those differences. Now, more advanced digital tool that you can use is there are also some digital measuring apps, and in a moment I'm going to go ahead and kind of pull out, do a special video specifically for using a cell phone as a digital ruler. But again, these are not going to be perfect measurements. In this case, we're looking at the same composition notebook that we looked at earlier. We know that it's 3.25 inches by 4.5. So while in this case we got the height correct, we didn't necessarily get the width correct. So there's certainly going to be some inaccuracies when we're trying to use optical tools, cameras, to try and take our measurements rather than physical rulers. So things to kind of keep in mind as you're looking at your different ways of finding a ruler in the world around you. So again, a lot of different ways to look at finding a ruler, making a ruler, kind of deriving a solution. But again, a lot of options. Find the ones that are going to work best for you, And in the real life, again, having enough of the tool set of your mind to be able to go ahead and derive those calculations and work your way through it enables you to better solve the problems that you see in your day-to-day lives. So I hope this helps. I hope this gave you some inspiration, and as always, feel free to ask questions, and I'll see you later.